Keir Starmer's government has unveiled a sweeping strategic defence review. Defence Secretary John Healey told Parliament that Britain's army must become battle ready and 10 times more lethal. Their plan: billions of new factories, AI guided missiles, long range drones, and a nuclear fleet expansion, all in the name of deterrence. But whilst they ramp up the war, public services are crumbling. The NHS waiting list is at 7.4 million. Councils are collapsing. Bins aren't being collected, and yet they've found £6 billion for weapons. Worse, they're paying for it by slashing foreign aid to just 0.3% of national income, the lowest in a generation. Aid workers say it will risk lives in places like Sudan and Gaza. And this militarization isn't neutral. Britain remains one of the world's top arms exporters. In just one quarter, Starmer's government approved 10.9 million in arms sales to Israel. As bombs fell on Gaza, £1.65 billion went to Saudi, which is still bombing Yemen. The government talks about peace, but it's feeding war and profiting. This from a prime minister who once stood as a human rights lawyer. Now he promises a military that's more lethal than ever. Is this actually about safety, or is this some sort of imperial nostalgia Britain is longing for? What does this really mean in 2025 and the 21st century, and who are we actually preparing to fight?
I think it means Keir Starmer's got really desperate. I think that's part of the story here. I was just looking at it, and I was trying to look at how much Keir Starmer saved from the changes to pension winter fuel payments. And of course, that burnt a lot of his political capital, and it was like 1.2 billion. Officially, the numbers are 1.2 billion. I think it's maybe as high as 4 billion projected to be saved. But the spending announced in this what's the term, the military review, the strategic defense review. Sorry, was the term I was trying to remember. That is 6 billion. 6 billion outstrips that easily. If he simply hadn't announced this, then he could have saved himself a complete political headache by not making the changes to the winter fuel payment. In fact, he could have doubled the winter fuel payment with this money. But I'm not saying that's what he necessarily should have done. But I'm just saying that the priority is always interesting. As the late great Tony Benn said, if you can find money to bomb people, you can find money to help people. There's also the fact that the Starmer saying the 10 times more lethal military line is very reminiscent, isn't it? It's very reminiscent of Kamala Harris saying that America's military should be the most lethal military in the world, and if it wasn't, she would make it the most lethal military in the world again. It's playing into this nationalist base that for both Starmer and Harris isn't there. It doesn't exist. It's a fantasy. The people who are like that hard in terms of nationalism, they're either voting Conservative, very few of those left, or they're voting for reform. It's again part of this wider picture of Starmer trying to play into his trying to play to the right wing, and the right wing are just not having any of it. And for some reason, Morgan McSweeney and Keir Starmer just seem unable to adapt their strategy in any way, which is funny because adaptation is a really important thing to have if you're talking about strategic defense. And this strategic defense review, recommends, explicitly that, it says that these recommended changes are being done specifically in response to Russian aggression. Right, Russian aggression is the term. I actually think this is kind of incorrect. I think this is probably to do with America withdrawing from Europe. I think this is all fallout from the instability that Donald Trump has brought about, where America is no longer a reliable ally.
Yeah.
So battle readiness in 2025 means being able to fight, one, without the support of America, and two, in a new drone-style trench warfare that we've been seeing in Ukraine that is probably, like, trench warfare seems to be returning. Battle lines that just don't move seem to be the norm as they were in the early 20th century. It seems like they're becoming the norm again. So the need to invest in things like drone infrastructure is as important today as in the early 1900s. It was important to invest in either tank infrastructure or artillery infrastructure, because that is what you do a lot of your fighting with, mining up the battlefield, trench digging tools and that sort of thing.
Mm.
In the modern era, I guess you'd also want uh, heat. I'm trying to think of the term. Thermal scopes, so that you
Yeah.
can see people peering over the top of the trench and firing at you from a distance. All of these technologies are really important to the modern battlefield. But it's important to say that the only reason that we're doing all this investment right now is because of the situation that Donald Trump um, has put the uh, Europe in, basically saying you're on your own. Um, and certainly, even if he's not saying you're on your own, his actions show that he's not a stable ally. How did Donald Trump get elected? Well, Donald Trump got elected because liberals, being advised by Keir Starmer and his absolute disaster of a government who can't adapt their strategy, they think that just playing to the right wing is how you win elections. Um, because of their inability to actually adapt, because they were stuck with Joe Biden, stuck in place in the USA for so long. And then Kamala Harris was playing to the right. She was being with Liz Cheney, Liz Cheney. Sorry, Liz Cheney. She was spending time with Liz Cheney. It was all playing to the right. Um, this this is what battle readiness means in 2025. It's a result of it's a result of liberals like messing things up in a major
Yeah.
way and letting conservatives and fascists get away with the worst stuff by just playing to that same base.
I completely agree with you. There are so many points that you made that I want to unpack slightly. But when it's true, when Starmer talks about making the army battle ready and investing in lethality and putting Britain back where it belongs, all of these quotes coming directly from him. He's obviously not just emulating Tory nationalism. This is someone who is kind of like borrowing the language of Trump era defense posturing, bigger guns, louder threats, and this manufactured strength to mask any sort of political weakness. And what we're seeing is a weakening in terms of the Labour Party. I think the Labour Party has been weakening in its own way, doing the things that it's doing. With the winter fuel payments, with the 2-child benefit cap, like all of these things have been weakening the Labour Party as is. Trump literally said he wanted a military that was so strong and so powerful that it would make the enemies tremble. And I find that with the verbiage that Starmer is using, it kind of emulates that same thing. It's just a it's a different accent, but kind of the same logic. This whole idea that well, if we can make ourselves 10 times more lethal, then it's just this I don't know, this politics of just spectacle. How can we posture that we are strong and we are a threat? Well, let's just buy more guns and make it seem as though we're strong enough. But what if this Labour Party was a party for Labour? I'd maybe see more defence happening for the people that actually exist in this country. I'm finding that the working people and the people who are most minoritised, the people who are most vulnerable, who literally exist in the margins of society, are suffering the most. And I see no one coming to their beck and call defending them. And that's the one thing that's really, really irritating me. He is not defending democracy in the slightest. I think he's mimicking strongman politics, which he actually went in pretending to oppose. But I do have another question for you
Mm.
on this. He does increasing lethality, lethal weapons, or whatever, actually make us safer? Does it just entangle us in more conflict abroad?
I think that the closest that human beings have come to annihilating all life on the only planet that we've ever known that can sustain life was the Cuban Missile Crisis. How did the Cuban Missile Crisis come about? The Cuban Missile Crisis came about through a Mexican standoff. through everybody believing that the other side was just about to fire their guns, so they had to get ready to fire theirs. And I think the Cuban Missile Crisis was stopped by a couple of staff members. Like we nearly, like human life nearly ended in the 1960s. Um, and this sort of Mexican standoff style logic really does get us to the worst places. It's one of the reasons that I'm a big supporter of um, either nuclear disarmament, or if we can't get immediate nuclear disarmament, the idea of a virtual nuclear arsenal, which is an arsenal that's kept in parts. So Japan has a virtual nuclear arsenal, and I think South Africa has a virtual nuclear arsenal as well. The idea is that these countries can put together a nuclear weapon. They have all the bits, but they're kept separate, so it's not like finger on the trigger all the time, right? And I think that approach is what keeps us safer. Not it's having the technology, but not having it like readily available. And I think in a way that the UK already had like a conventional um, a virtual conventional armory as it was. We know the UK is good at producing weapons. We have horrific companies that make horrific weapons that make horrific amounts of money for absolutely horrific people that then influence our politics in horrific ways. It doesn't make us safer, of course, but what it does do is distract from economic instability, which is why conflict so often in history follows economic instability, right? um, the economic instability in the late 1800s, the early 1890s was followed by World War One. And actually into the 1910s as well. There was a lot of economic instability, um, but also, of course, I'm thinking of the 1929 financial crash and the links between that and the Second World War. So often it's that nationalist leaders need distraction from economic instability. And so the rhetoric they turn to is one that isolates um, others abroad, right? The idea is you can either blame enemies from within or enemies from without, but you have to blame somebody because you need a reason as to why people are suffering. And you need somewhere for like the anger of the community at inequality and at economic instability. You need somewhere for that anger to go. So they either turn the rhetoric on internal groups, they either turn it on immigrants, as one of the classic examples, like LGBT people. It becomes about like purifying your society, um, and keeping your own identity. They're not like us, type thing. Um, or you can either do that, or you can say, well, China, Russia, these countries, they're creating big scary arsenals, so we need to have arsenals that are ready to and I'm not saying that Russia and China aren't a threat, because I think there's legitimate threat from both Russia and China in different ways. Um, but I do think that this language and the methods being used here are not about protecting us from Russia and China. We're living in an era where, and Britain already has access to nuclear warheads. I don't think people understand just how devastating nuclear weapons are. I had a field expert come and talk to us during my university days about nuclear weapons, and she was asked by an audience member. She was asked like, "What would you do if a nuclear weapon like actually went off? Is there any truth to this kind of duck and cover stuff?" And she was like, "If the UK was involved in a nuclear exchange," she said she would put on all of her black clothes and go outside and stand where she thought the center of the blast would be, because it was better to die really, really fast than to be in the fallout of what would come as a result. I don't think people understand how devastating nuclear weapons are. I just don't think we think about it. And uh, another thing that we don't think about is the idea that a nuclear warhead often contains, it's a single rocket that contains lots and lots of nuclear bombs that then rain down across a whole geographical area and set off like multiple Nagasaki's, Hiroshima's, like going off all at once. Um, this is like the devastation of nuclear weapons is already more lethal firepower than any country could ever need. The idea that having a more lethal military, the idea that being more lethal is the future of, is how we keep people safe. It's kind of a nonsense when we've already got access to those sorts of weapons. It really is quite
Yeah,
nonsense. Anybody who's
absolutely.
not deterred by that is not going to be deterred by you having extra drone technology. That's kind of not how it works. It's all about fueling companies, fueling profits that pay for that pay politicians, pay politicians in Reform, pay politicians in Labour, and pay politicians in the Conservative Party. One last thing. Sorry, I'm aware I'm rambling a little bit.
You're not rambling.
But we need to get an understanding that we are not an empire anymore. We are not a big guns, big trade empire anymore. The US still has a bit of that about them, but the US needs to come to the same realization, because the future of the West in general, we need to recognize that the future of the West in general is not hard power, it's soft power. The only hope of influence that we have in the future, literally the only hope, just because of the way that China and India in particular are outproducing us, and they are outproducing us by miles. They are going to outproduce America and outwealth America by miles by 2050. The only way to have any sort of advantage in the world that is being built is building soft power, and that means building influence, and that means that your reputation matters. That means all of this stuff that's going on with Israel, it's destroying our chances at a future where the West has influence. We are going to be, if we do not buck up and actually be more harsh on nationalist politicians who think that building bigger guns is the future of the West. If we're not more harsh on these people, and we're not going, no, you are being stupid, you need to be smart, you need to understand that it's going to be trade relations, and it's going to be media influence throughout the world, and the West's future of media influence, that is going to be what maintains the West's power. If we don't come to this understanding, the West is the West, but more particularly Britain, which is already doesn't have an empire, is going to be a power that is acted upon rather than act upon other nations. And based on the way that we've treated other nations, they're not going to be kind to us. Why would they be? We haven't been kind to them. We've been horrible to them. We need
Yeah,
to come to that understanding. Lethality is not the future.
yeah.
Morality is the future.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.